Hello, my name is Christopher Anatra. You know me as the Quantum Businessman. Welcome to this series of videos I've titled Symphony of Realities. Each of these videos or acts are interconnected like a symphony to help you understand how reality and your consciousness work within our holographic universe, composed of hard light technology, and how the Mandela effect is exposing it all. I've created the symphony for you, the reality programmers of the Dreamweave, codename Dragons, to help you remember who you are as you walk in this lucid dream. Because you are lucid dreaming right now. Yes, you. We're both sharing the same lucid dream together. Welcome to Act 6, History, Scene 1, Napoleon Dynamite. With this act, I plan on taking your consciousness on a roller coaster ride. So strap yourself in, put your tray tables up, have your Dramamine ready, and a fresh pair of Depends diapers, because here we go. I'm not going to give your brain or bladder a break with this one. And yes, the name of these adult diapers were always Depends in my old timeline, and not Depend. Is that a Mandela effect for you? Depends, right? Did you have any idea you'd see me dressed up like Napoleon holding a box of Depend diapers? Neither did I. But no need to be so serious all the time. Just to give you a hint, this episode is not going to go the way you think. For those of you watching this, to hear what I have to reveal about Napoleon and Tartaria, I'll give you a partial hint. The 40 Thieves. If you know the history of the British Royal Navy, you'll have an idea of what I'm referring to. I always wondered why Napoleon, who was such a brilliant strategist, had failed so miserably when he invaded Russia, with 90% of his army dead by the time he left. Napoleon's invasion into Russia that ended in disaster was always about getting those ships. The 40 ships known as the 40 Thieves, and about 100 more being built in St. Petersburg. What do I mean? I recommend that you watch this presentation in its entirety so you have a good understanding of Napoleon the man, the master strategist, the enlightened leader, the mathematician, the engineer, the explorer for ancient artifacts and knowledge in Egypt, and the true purpose of the Russian invasion of 1812 and the role that Tartaria played. Not only that, but the unknown importance of his campaign into Egypt, the Battle of the Pyramids, and what he really accomplished. As you watch this presentation, you'll discover a chess game of the gods unfolding. A chess game with chess moves using DNA ancestral lineage like Game of Thrones for the purpose of healing and advancing in the Earth game. Gods incarnating as humans to heal and advance. Let's start with a Mandela effect for many people, possibly you. Something very basic and well known about Napoleon. This will be multiple choice. Was Napoleon A, above average in height, B, average in height, or C, shorter than average? What do you remember? The correct answer is, can I get a drum roll, please? The correct answer is A. He was above average in height. Did you think he was shorter than average? It is said that when Napoleon lived, the average height of a man was about 5 feet 5 inches. Napoleon's height was 5 feet 7 inches. So Napoleon was at least 2 inches taller than average. But you might be thinking, what about the Napoleon complex? If you haven't heard of it, the Napoleon complex is a popular belief that short men tend to compensate for their lack of height through domineering behavior and aggression. According to this belief, Napoleon compensated for his lack of height by seeking power, war, and conquest. Would it surprise you to know that Napoleon was considered an enlightened leader, and that the French people loved and respected him? He created reforms including trial by jury, equality before the law, a citizen army, freedom of religion, abolition of feudal privileges, and freedom of the press. Not only was he an enlightened leader, but he had the adventurous spirit and quest for ancient knowledge and artifacts, like an Indiana Jones adventurer archaeologist. Did you ever think of Napoleon like that? So how did Napoleon get stuck with this false identity of being a short, domineering, and aggressive person with a complex that has permeated our society until today? First of all, the global narrative, or negative matrix, did not like Napoleon. He did something big in his campaign into Egypt, which I'll talk about later. The global narrative, the creators of our false history, now tell us it was because of cartoons created by the British cartoonist James Gilray. Basically, everyone knew that Napoleon was tall, but the British used propaganda and newspaper political cartoons to make Napoleon appear short and incompetent and angry all the time. Why? Because the French and British were at war with each other. The global narrative also tells us that when Napoleon died on the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean, his French physicians measured him and he was 5 feet 2 inches. However, the French measurement system is different from the English, and 5 feet 2 inches in French measurement equates to a little more than 5 feet 7 inches in English measurement. This information has always been known by historians, so why do most people feel Napoleon was short? Perhaps in another timeline, Napoleon was shorter than he is now. Perhaps in another timeline, all the information about Napoleon being above average in height was suppressed. Either way, is Napoleon's height and the falsely named Napoleon complex a Mandela effect for you? What about Napoleon having children? In my old timeline, I was taught that Napoleon had no children. He had no sons. He had no heirs. However, in this timeline, he has 3 sons. This was the same phenomenon that I noted in Act 3 of the Symphony of Realities, titled The White Sun Timeline, about John Astor, the richest man in the world at that time. I clearly remember that both John Astor and his newlywed wife both went down with the Titanic. She would not leave his side. It was romantic and tragic. However, in this timeline, she survived and was safe aboard a lifeboat. With an added surprise, she was 5 months pregnant. She later gave birth to their son, John Jacob, who went by the name Jakey. He was known as the Titanic baby. And as I was preparing this act, I was shocked to learn that Napoleon had 3 sons. The first was named Charles Léon Daniel. Charles looked just like his father, but wound up dying in poverty because he was lazy and attempted to live off the fame and success of his father without doing any work. The second was named Alexandre Kolonowaleski. Alexandre entered the military and later became a successful and admired diplomat. Although considered illegitimate, in 2013, his DNA was confirmed as being a son of Napoleon. Alexandre had at least 4 children who had their own families and was able to pass down Napoleon's DNA lineage. His third son was Napoleon Francois Charles Joseph Bonaparte, also known as the King of Rome, Napoleon II, also known as the Eaglet, because Napoleon's symbol was the eagle. Unfortunately, in this timeline, Napoleon died at the age of 21 of tuberculosis. Are Napoleon's 3 sons a Mandela effect for you? At this point, for those of you that don't know me or have watched any of my other videos, you might be wondering, who is this quantum businessman guy? Where do I get my information? My videos have to do with consciousness, our holographic universe, how reality works, and Mandela effects. I'm a quantum physics, many worlds, unified field theory, holographic universe, quantum entanglement, Akashic records, human consciousness grid, and multiple timelines type of guy. Yes, I'm complicated, just a little. And I use the Mandela effect to expose what reality actually is. And it's not what you think, because you're dreaming right now. Yes, you. We are sharing a lucid dream. What I talk about is related to consciousness, timelines, our holographic universe, and how the Mandela effect is exposing it all. When Tesla said, if you want to understand the universe, think of energy, frequency, and vibration, he was right on. This information I'm bringing forward is from the Akashic records, what I call the Internet of the Universe. Before the year 2017, I had never even heard of the Akashic records. In 2017, I started to receive visual data and what I would call informational downloads, things that I just couldn't make up or even imagine. Trying to figure out what was going on with me, I started asking people about what I was experiencing. When someone told me they thought I was getting access to the Akashic records, I was like, Akashic what? I never heard of it and thought it was nonsense at first. And now here we are in the year 2021, and I'm still learning and growing in my abilities as I devote more of my life and time and energy to this pursuit. I really love it, and thank you for watching my videos. For those of you watching this that have access to the Akashic records, I invite you to participate and share your comments below, because we all want our true history to be revealed and known. Especially now that history keeps changing as timelines are collapsing and merging as we accelerate into a higher frequency Earth. Here's an example. When I was creating Act 1 of the Symphony of Realities, I had carefully researched the worst maritime disaster in United States history. All my research, including results from Google and other search engines, said it was the SS Eastland disaster in Chicago, where 844 passengers were killed as the SS Eastland ship rolled over on July 24th, 1915. I'll provide a link to that video where I discuss this. For myself, this was a big Mandela effect, and I spoke about it related to the Titanic. But the SS Eastland is no longer the worst maritime disaster in United States history. I had to go back to that Act 1 video to make sure that the info about the SS Eastland disaster was still there, and it was. I was thinking that it possibly wouldn't be there anymore because of timeline collapses and merges, where we now have a new worst maritime disaster in United States history. It looks like I created what's called residue for the older SS Eastland disaster timeline because all that information is still in my video. However, in our current timeline, the worst maritime disaster in United States history is now the Sultana disaster of April 27, 1865. Sultana disaster? That name was never on the list of worst United States maritime disasters.
If you're interested enough in history to be watching the History Guy, then my guess is you've probably heard of the sinking of the Titanic. What you might not know is that the Titanic disaster was not the worst maritime disaster in American history. That actually occurred on the Mississippi River. And while the story of the explosion aboard the steamboat Sultana is interesting, what is maybe even more interesting is the reason that you may never have heard of it.
The Sultana was a Mississippi riverboat which exploded 7 miles north of Memphis, Tennessee. Almost 1,800 people lost their lives. That's more than twice that died on the SS Eastland. It was right after the Civil War, carrying Union prisoners of war held by the Confederacy, who were allowing them to return to their homes.
Near 2 a.m. on April 27, 1865, 7 miles north of Memphis, Tennessee, 3 of Sultana's boilers exploded. The explosion tore apart the boat. Men were thrown into the river. The forward part of the upper decks collapsed into the exposed furnace boxes and set the boat ablaze. Men jumped into the river to avoid the flames, but weakened from their time in the prison camps, they couldn't fight the current and drowned.
If you research this, you'll find that the negative matrix global narrative tells us that no one knew about this disaster because just the day before, John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Abraham Lincoln was killed, and that news overshadowed this disaster.
Even people in 1865 barely heard of it. You have to understand what was going on in April of 1865. On April 9th, Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. 5 days later, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. On April 26th, the day before the Sultana disaster, John Wilkes Booth, the assassin, was caught and killed. And that same day, General Joseph Johnston surrendered the last large Confederate army. In the horrors of the war, the people of America barely noticed another 1,700 deaths. It barely made the back page of the newspaper.
Really? The largest maritime disaster in United States history barely made the last page of the newspaper? By the way, I'll leave a link to the History Guy's video about the Sultana disaster below. From this, you can begin to understand how the false global narrative attempts to tell us, "Nothing to see here, human. This isn't a Mandela effect. Just bad journalism during a busy news week." This couldn't possibly be a negative timeline insertion. Again, all my research into the largest maritime disasters in United States history just a few months ago never referenced anything about the Sultana. For myself, both the SS Eastland disaster and the Sultana steamboat explosion are both Mandela effects. What about you? And when you begin your journey into the Akashic records, the internet of the universe, you can really start going down some rabbit holes. I'll give you an example. A recent big Mandela effect for myself was learning that less than 2 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed, the United States attacked England in 1778. Did you know that the colonists attacked England? On April 23, 1778, John Paul Jones, with 30 volunteers from his ship, the USS Ranger, launched a surprise attack on the 2 harbor forts at Whitehaven, England. John Paul Jones burns one of the forts and burns the entire town of Whitehaven, England, to the ground. The attack shows how vulnerable the British Royal Navy is, causing fear within England for the United States and the Continental Navy. So, besides a big Mandela effect, because I was never taught that we attacked England during the Revolutionary War, what was the rabbit hole? It had to do with John Paul Jones. Who was John Paul Jones? John Paul Jones is known as the father of the American Navy. That's a big title. When you research him, you discover that he was Scottish, born in 1747, and was a ship captain. After killing one of his crew with a sword, he fled to the colonies in the United States to escape prosecution.
Jones, you see, although his name might suggest otherwise, was not in fact Welsh. He was in fact a lowland Scot and had grown up in Scotland under the rule of the British Empire. However, he was not the nicest of people by all accounts, running as a smuggler, then crewing on a slaver, and eventually ending up, at fair enough, a fairly young age, in charge of his own brig. At that point he'd managed to accidentally, or possibly on purpose, kill a man for a relatively minor offence by sentencing a very elderly sailor to flogging. Shortly after that, he faced another mutiny on another ship where he accidentally, quote unquote, at least according to him and not according to anybody else who was present, managed to run the leader of the mutineers through with a sword. This was after the mutiny was sparked, apparently, by his own mistreatment of the crew, especially the lack of pay.
He then joined the Continental Navy and eventually led a raiding party to the city of Whitehaven, England, which he burned along with one of the English forts. One thing about John Paul Jones, to put it nicely, is that he didn't have any people skills. It's said that he got along with Benjamin Franklin and John Hancock, but besides that, just about everyone that knew him either wanted nothing to do with him, would cause a mutiny on his ship, or wanted to kill him. Because of all the mutinies, he couldn't even keep a regular crew and had to resort to going to prisons and buying prisoners with sailing experience to crew his ship. Even the United States Continental Army didn't want him and caused him to join the Imperial Russian Navy as a rear admiral. The Russians in time didn't want him either. Then, in 1792, he was found dead in his apartment in Paris, France. He was in Paris at the same time as Napoleon, and we'll get to that later. But now, this is where it gets interesting. In 1905, after a 6-year search to find his remains by the United States, his mummified body was finally found in an unidentified graveyard in Paris. It took a lot of effort and cost by the United States government to locate his body and confirm it was him. His body was brought to the United States aboard the USS Brooklyn, escorted by 3 other cruisers. On approaching the American coastline, 7 U.S. Navy battleships joined the procession, escorting Jones's body back to America. This was a big deal for a mummified body. Could it be that the United States Navy wanted to ensure no one stole John Paul Jones' mummified body, especially the time-traveling Russian Navy of the future? I'll explain more soon. Then the story gets stranger. On April 24th, 1906, Jones's coffin was installed in Bancroft Hall at the United States Naval Academy, Annapolis, Maryland, following a ceremony by President Theodore Roosevelt.
April 24th, 1906, they carried the casket into the new armory, and President Theodore Roosevelt, the French ambassador, Admiral of the Navy George Dewey, Governor Warfield of Maryland, lots of speeches.
President Roosevelt gave a speech praising John Paul Jones and holding him up as an example to the officers of the Navy. Really? The guy that almost everyone who knew him hated him was an example? John Paul Jones' mummified body are now in a magnificent bronze and marble sarcophagus at the Naval Academy in Annapolis.
I'm in the crypt of John Paul Jones, the great naval leader and hero of our war for independence. The crypt behind me is made of marble, black and white, Royal Pyrenees, donated by our French allies. The casket is supported by bronze dolphins and decorated on the top with bronze seaweed.
Above the sarcophagus is the Naval Academy Chapel. The Naval Academy Chapel is a focal point of the Academy and the city of Annapolis. Could it be that the Naval Academy Chapel is built over powerful ley lines of intersecting earth grids which amplify his mummified DNA? It reminds me of my visit to Castle Wielsberg in Germany. Castle Wielsberg was used by Himmler and the Nazi SS as a training center. It had a crypt on the lower level, and above that was a tower and a place for gathering with the image of the black sun on the floor. You can discover more about my visit to Castle Wielsberg in Episode 3, Part 2 of my Quantum Businessman series titled Tartarians, Stargates, and Charlie Chaplin. I'll leave a link below. Back to John Paul Jones. What do the Akashic records tell us about him? Why would the U.S. Navy want his remains, his mummified body, his DNA at the center of their Naval Academy? First off, John Paul Jones is really well camouflaged. It's hard to read him. Who was John Paul Jones? Perhaps he was one of the 7 spirits of Edward Thatch, otherwise known as Blackbeard the Pirate. Blackbeard the Pirate? Don't worry though, because the rabbit hole goes deeper. First of all, what do I mean by one of the 7 spirits of Blackbeard? Many of what you would call the movers and the shakers in what I refer to as the Earth game have more than one spirit within them, and Blackbeard had 7. Many of you have at least heard of Blackbeard, who was one of history's most famous pirates. Who was Blackbeard the Pirate?
Blackbeard's early life is shrouded in mystery. His real name was probably Edward Thatch, and he may have been a sailor from the English port of Bristol. Some believe he fought in the War of Spanish Succession, at the end of which he found himself unemployed in the Caribbean in the the last great age of piracy. So he travelled to the outlaw haven of Nassau and turned pirate.
And then you must ask the question, who really was Blackbeard?
Captain Thatch, as I live and breathe. What is this magnificent muzzle you've cultivated, eh?
Why fly a black flag when a black beard will do?
With 7 spirits and so many timelines he manifested, really a hairball of timelines, it's difficult to get a clear answer. His beard wasn't the only thing that was a hairball. Trying to read the many timelines of Blackbeard gave me a headache. It is said that Blackbeard would tie his beard in braids, had a sling over his shoulder that held 3 pistols, and that he would stick lighted strings under his hat.
Caution's nothing without charisma. If a man plays the fool, then it's only fools he'll persuade, but appear to be the devil. And all men will submit.
And would you be the devil?
Or an audience. Aye. All a big show.
Blackbeard's flag was a skeleton stabbing a heart with a spear while holding up a glass to toast the devil. From what I read in the Akashic records, he was possibly directly connected to a Greek god. A Greek god? Which one? He appears to be one of the sons of Poseidon.
Poseidon, the lord of the seas, is one of the most famous and revered Olympian gods. This god is also known by the name of Neptune, his Latin name in Rome. After the Titanomachy, the major battle between gods and titans, the world was shared between the 3 major Olympian gods. By lottery, Poseidon was given the domain of the seas, a domain that had been controlled by the ancient deities Nereus and Ocean. Although he had a seat on the Olympian Council of Gods, Poseidon preferred to live in his underwater palace. The god carried his trident at all times, a weapon that allowed him to generate earthquakes and create fountains and springs. His weapon was forged by the Cyclops during the war against the Titans and became one of the god's symbols. The god of the seas paraded on the water in his chariot, drawn by dazzling animals. Behind him, a large procession of marine creatures and minor deities.
Poseidon was one of the 12 Olympians in ancient Greek mythology. He was the god of the sea. It appears that Blackbeard had a spirit spark to one of his sons, and Poseidon had many sons with different personalities. I won't name which one, but not one of the good ones. The bottom line is this: is it possible that John Paul Jones had at least the partial DNA of a god? The god of the sea? Wouldn't this explain so much? Especially why the Navy was so interested in his mummified body. But why would a god or the son of a god want to incarnate as a human? Could it be part of the chess game of the gods unfolding? A chess game with chess moves, using DNA ancestral lineage like a Game of Thrones for the purpose of healing, advancing, and graduating in the Earth game. Gods incarnating as humans to heal old wounds, advance, and graduate. I'll talk more about this in the next part of this Napoleon Dynamite series, but wanted to mention it now because it's actually the central topic I want you to understand. After years of searching for the mummified body of John Paul Jones, he was found and brought to the United States with all kinds of protection and pomp and circumstance and speeches, including a speech by President Theodore Roosevelt himself. And who better to have their DNA both respected and energy harvested in the crypt and chapel for the Navy than the son of the god of the sea. The United States Navy, both of the sea and covert space program, are a force to be reckoned with. Perhaps the DNA of the son of Poseidon is a reason why. What do you think? If what I'm saying is accurate, and your inner knowing will resonate it as truth if it is, then what does that say about the top levels of our government's belief in the gods? If they believe in the existence of Poseidon, what about his brother Zeus? What about all the other gods? What is a god? Could a god be an advanced, higher dimensional reality programmer? Is our government superstitious? Or do they know more than they let us know? And why would the sarcophagus be under constant guard? Why are there regular ceremonies playing taps, etc.? Remember that everything in our holographic universe is energy, frequency, and vibration. Could the playing of taps by the trumpet send out a frequency to stimulate John Paul Jones' mummified DNA? Remember that after John Paul Jones exited the Continental Navy, he joined the Imperial Russian Navy and became a Rear Admiral. If the Russians were able to get a hold of his mummified body, his DNA, locate it in a special location such as the Russian Naval Academy and glorify it like the Americans, could that make the Russians the dominant navy of the sea? Something to think about. It's interesting to note that in 2017, 2 representatives of the Russian Federation visited the John Paul Jones sarcophagus at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. The Russian officials later wreathed draped with Russian flags in front of the magnificent bronze sarcophagus. No need for time travel to take the body from the Americans while it was being transported across the Atlantic. Again, very interesting for a man which Great Britain accused of piracy, and King George III even declared him a personal enemy and promised to hang him twice. Discovering this information is like complicated pieces of a puzzle that don't appear to match at all, fitting together perfectly. And just so you know, I'm not revealing this information to put the Navy, the Naval Academy, or any military faction in a negative frequency. Instead, I give respect for the protection they provide in this ultra-complicated house of cards world where psychopaths, war makers, would invade and conquer your family and homeland. Remember, even a peacemaker stands their ground. A peacemaker protects those they love. What I don't agree with is when a government and its military purposely misleads its people with propaganda and false flag events. How about you? If you're in the military, really any military in the world, the police, etc., who will you take orders from? The psychopathic, parasitic global narrative run by the elites? If the order comes down to arrest people exercising their religious rights, will you blindly follow orders? Will you arrest your pastor, your friends, your family? Our world is changing quickly, and there will be new heroes rising up for the people. It only takes 10% of the population to start a revolution. Just 10%. Heroes who take their oath seriously to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. In the famous speech by Charlie Chaplin from the movie The Great Dictator, he said, "Soldiers, don't give yourself to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder.
Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty."
There will be new heroes rising up for the people, for their families. Will you be one of them? Understand that my talking about John Paul Jones and the military navies of the sea does have a connection to what I'll be covering about Napoleon, so hold tight for that. this roller coaster is still on the tracks. Poseidon and dolphins are closely connected, and it reminded me of a Mandela effect that appeared as I was creating this episode. Are you aware of the Mandela effect of at least 4 new types of dolphin species that have just appeared on the timeline for many people? This includes the Atlantic spotted dolphin, the Rizzo's dolphin, which is purple until it's an adult, the short-beaked common dolphin, which can be yellow and black, and the striped dolphin. In my old timeline, we mostly just had the gray Fraser dolphins. It was a boring gray dolphin timeline. Now we've some amazing and colorful dolphins. Are these new dolphin species a Mandela effect for you? We took a detour down the rabbit hole from talking about Napoleon to the Sultana riverboat disaster to a Mandela effect of the United States attacking England during the Revolutionary War, to John Paul Jones, to Blackbeard, to Poseidon, to dolphins. Do you begin to understand how important the Akashic records are going to be to help us piece together our true history and the many hidden connections between it all, and how important the Mandela effect is in exposing it all? If it wasn't for the Mandela effect of the Continental Navy attacking England during the Revolutionary War, I would have completely missed this important information, which is all relevant and leads us back to Napoleon. So, back to Napoleon and some background about him. Yes, I was wondering when you'd get back to me. Don't worry, while I was waiting, I invaded another country. Viva la France! Why am I not surprised, Napoleon? Yes, back to Napoleon. Viva la France! These aren't Mandela effects, but will help you understand who the man was. First, Napoleon was not French. Not French? What? He was from the island of Corsica. He was Italian. Corsica is the 4th largest island in the Mediterranean, immediately north of the Italian island of Sardinia. Corsica is an amazingly beautiful island, bursting with beauty. Napoleon was Italian, and he spoke Italian fluently. French was his second language. He actually spoke French with an Italian accent. When he was campaigning in Italy, he would speak to the crowds in Italian, which made them enthusiastic about having a foreign general so fluent in their language. You might wonder how an Italian could become an emperor of France. That's because the year before Napoleon was born, Corsica became a territory of France. And Italy wasn't considered a nation at that time. It was just a series of independent states. So, Napoleon was a French national with Italian ethnicity. In 1796, Napoleon invaded Italy with his army and was able to drive out the Austrians. He was outnumbered by the Austrians and their allies, but as a master strategist, was able to outwit them, and they ultimately surrendered. Next, when he was 28 years old, he set sail for Egypt, and on July 1st, 1798, Napoleon landed in Egypt with 400 ships and 54,000 men in Alexandria. I won't go into all the details of the Egyptian invasion, but want to focus on what would be called the Battle of the Pyramids and his experience in the Great Pyramid of Giza. When Napoleon invaded Egypt, it was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. But Napoleon's invasion of Egypt was different. Besides soldiers and sailors, Napoleon brought along 167 scientists, engineers, artists, geographers, historians, economists, architects, and scholars. They were a type of savant army. Why? Napoleon is not remembered as a scientist or archaeologist, but he thought of himself as one. He was trained as a military engineer and had considerable mathematical skills. And he was fascinated with Egypt, fascinated with the pharaohs, fascinated with the possibilities of ancient Egyptian technology.
When Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt in 1798, he did more than just conquer a country. He uncovered a lost civilization. Egypt had been virtually closed to Europeans for centuries, and when the French saw the pyramids of Giza, they were astonished. 4,500 years after its construction, the Great Pyramid was still the tallest building in the world. Everything about this ancient culture seemed extraordinary.
It's as though Napoleon had an internal, powerful, driving motivation to go to Egypt. One of Napoleon's heroes was Alexander the Great. He knew that Alexander took scholars and learned men of his campaigns to Egypt. He knew he should do the same. It was a trip that would change him personally and change the world, far more than conquering a country. That's why the parasitic, psychopathic global narrative didn't like Napoleon, and why most people, when they think of him, may have a negative viewpoint. By the way, did you ever hear that story that Napoleon had his soldiers shoot off the nose of the Sphinx as target practice? That's totally incorrect. The nose was missing at least 50 years before Napoleon arrived in Egypt, as noted by sketches made by Danish Navy Captain Ludwig Norden in 1737. Napoleon would have never allowed that. Napoleon's men's first amazing discovery was the Rosetta Stone.
Over here! Come and take a look at this!
What do you think it is?
Different scripts on one stone. Why would they do that? This is Greek. We can read this.
There were 3 inscriptions on the stone. The mysterious ancient hieroglyphs at the top, then another unknown text, and at the bottom, ancient Greek. This was a unique find. Although the first 2 texts were unreadable, Greek was a well-known language and could be easily translated. Along with his soldiers, Napoleon had taken an army of scholars to unravel Egypt's ancient culture, including antiquarians, artists, and linguists.
It says here that all 3 scripts are saying the same thing.
So by translating the Greek, they would know what the hieroglyphs said.
The discovery of the Rosetta Stone was a breakthrough in Egyptology. It finally allowed the hieroglyphs to be translated. Imagine if the Rosetta Stone was never discovered. Imagine if to this day we couldn't interpret the hieroglyphs of Egypt. Imagine the knowledge and understanding about ancient Egypt that we wouldn't know. Not only was the Rosetta Stone discovered, but Napoleon's army of scholars and engineers made meticulous topographical surveys. They studied native animals and plants. Minerals were collected and classified. The artifacts, the temples and tombs of Luxor, Philae, Dendera, the obelisks in the Valley of the Kings were measured, mapped, and drawn in meticulous detail. These were things that the outside world had never seen. This resulted in a 23-volume encyclopedia about Egypt being created by Napoleon's savants, and it created Egyptology as a field of study.
So the purpose of the description of Egypt was to create an encyclopedic record of the entire region. The 3 main topics were the antiquities, the natural history, and the modern state.
There were 294 engravers who engraved all of the drawings that were brought back from Egypt, which included everything from insects to stones to the biggest, greatest pyramids.
This volume here is what we call an elephant folio because it really is the largest size of a book in our collection. And a book of this size and the publication project of this size really could only be done by someone of Napoleon's stature and Napoleon's great vision to outdo everyone else in every way possible.
And now, on to what is known as the Battle of the Pyramids. When Napoleon invaded Egypt, it was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. He also wanted his army of scholars to make Egypt a province of France with a gift, the gift of modern science and enlightenment. He wanted to help the Egyptians map their country, manage the Nile, increase agriculture, improve the standard of living, and provide them a much better educational system. He wanted to show the world and make Egypt an example of an ideal colony of France, and of course, to block the British from their trade routes into Asia. But the Ottoman Empire stood in the way. The Ottomans in Egypt were led by Ibrahim Bey and Murad Bey, who were both known to be cruel leaders. The Battle of the Pyramids was fought on July 21st, 1798, between Napoleon's army and the cavalry of the Ottoman army.
Vive la France! Vive la France!
Napoleon organized his men into rectangles and was able to throw back multiple cavalry charges. In the end, Napoleon only lost as little as 30 men that day, but he almost completely wiped out the Ottoman cavalry, which lost at least 3,000 men. Some estimates put it at 25,000. The Ottoman leader, Murad Bey, salvaged what was left of his army and fled. It was kind of like this. On the surface level, you know what happened at the Battle of the Pyramids, but something far more important occurred behind the scenes. What could that be? Perhaps, at that time, there were what you would call apex predators living in the bodies of humans in high positions in Egypt in the Ottoman Empire. Perhaps there were demons in human bodies. Perhaps there were succubus in human bodies. Perhaps there were necromancers in human bodies, and perhaps there were Anunnaki in human bodies. And if so, they were causing all types of suffering for humans and disrupting the grid system. Napoleon's bringing an end to the Ottoman Empire in Egypt brought unity to everyone. It allowed the planet to unite. And most importantly, maybe, just maybe, it allowed these negative players in human bodies, the demons in human bodies, succubus in human bodies, necromancers in human bodies, Anunnaki in human bodies, to be ejected from the game, ejected from the Earth game, and never to be allowed back in. If true, this allowed Napoleon to have a very special birthday. What do I mean? About 25 days after the Battle of the Pyramids was Napoleon's birthday. He was born on August 15th. He turned 29 years old. What I'm about to tell you next is from my reading of the Akashic records and also a personal experience I had. Let me explain. What I see is that on August 15th, 1798, Napoleon, like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar before him, along with two of his scientist savants, entered the Great Pyramid of Giza. They most likely visited the King's Chamber, and from what I read, also made their way to the Queen's Chamber. I understand there are stories about Napoleon going into the Great Pyramid and sleeping there, but I don't see that he actually slept there. He didn't need to. First of all, did you know that we each have a special type of portal or gateway that opens for us on our birthday? It normally happens during our dream time, and we are able to be with our soul family, even if you don't remember it. Our birthday opens to us our soul family portal. My advice isn't to party too hard on your birthday, so you can remember that special soul family reunion and have a better experience. You can save the party for the next day. Now, what happens if you have this experience with an actual Stargate? If you can open both your birthday portal and a Stargate portal. If you remember my videos from Act 5 of the Symphony of Realities, I mentioned that there is a Stargate in the Queen's Chamber in the Great Pyramid of Egypt. So there was Napoleon on his birthday in the Great Pyramid of Giza in the Queen's Chamber on the day of his birthday portal and a Stargate portal opening. What do you think happened? From my own experience, I can tell you. What do I mean? Do you also remember in Act 5 that I mentioned that I visited a Stargate in Sri Lanka? I did a type of standing meditation called a supernova while at the Stargate and went unconscious.
This is the rock art at Shakwila Shakray. I've always wanted to see this. This is known as a Stargate. It's called the Keys to the Universe by the locals. Now what's particularly interesting about this, it has your classic Indo-European spiral work that you see on megaliths, plus the crucifix or the cross shape, which also appears on early Indo-European and European megaliths. It's surrounded by what appeared to be a kind of a zodiac of aquatic creatures. And according to locals, this is a Stargate. This is where you can pass between dimensions, you can pass between planets. These symbols are almost like a sigil or a key to allow you to do this. It's been speculated that Arthur C. Clarke, when he wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, was actually inspired by the nature of this in terms of jumping into space, into hyperspace, or interstellar travel, or fast speed, as which happened in the novel and the film when he went from the moon to Jupiter.
Something I didn't tell you about my visit to this Stargate is this.
So today is December 28th, 2019. It's my birthday, by the way. 54 years old, at a special location in Sri Lanka where there is a Stargate, and did a meditation, something called a supernova, and I blanked out and fell forward, last thing I knew, into the wrought iron, and cut my head open and left a little blood sacrifice. What a way to spend my birthday.
You jumped through the portal, the gateway?
Went through the portal, came back.
Yes, I visited the Stargate in Sri Lanka on my birthday, the day when my birthday portal was open. What happened? You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but I will tell you, because it sheds some important light about what happened to Napoleon on his birthday at the Stargate in the Queen's Chamber. In part 2, coming up next. Don't you just love a cliffhanger? Viva la France!